And now, it's time for TJwow. And now.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are and when you're listening to this recording. We are really pleased to welcome you to the Training Journal webinar. I am your host, I'm Deputy Editor of Training Journal. My name is Jo Cook, and I'm really looking forward to discussing with Steve, Helena and Laurent about our topic today. Now, what's the format and the approach? It's not your traditional webinar that we do around these parts, and if you've been here before, you'll definitely know that. This is all about conversation. The late, great Jay Cross said it's the most powerful learning technology that we've ever invented. And that's what we're here for today, is to have a really great conversation. You've been using that chat window perfectly. Please carry on using that because you can use that to chat with each other, to share all sorts of different things and just to network and get to know each other if you want to. You have a Q&A pod at the very bottom of the screen. Please put your questions in there if you want me to make sure I absolutely see them. I promise I'll see them all, and we'll do our best to go and answer those as well. You can also join us on TJwow on Twitter. We are tweeting there throughout the session, so please go and tell us a little bit about what is it that you're learning, how are you picking up on things, and I'll share the Twitter handles of everybody with us when we do some introductions. And that's it. You know we do all of our recordings. You can go and register for our next webinars, and I will tell you a little bit about those at the end as well. But for now, I think it's about time that we went in to find out a little bit about our speakers and get some introductions from them. So let me bring the video on screen, and we have them all here ready to go, and we need to do some introductions. So we'll go to Steve, then Laurent, then Helena, and just find out a little bit about what it is that they do, where they are, and the companies that they work for, and then we'll move on to the topic. So Steve, let's get you unmuted and tell us a little bit about what you do and who you work for.
Yeah, sure. Thanks ever so much, Jo, and welcome everybody. So I'm Steve Pritchard, and I'm Director of Consulting and Innovation here at a company called TMA World. And as a business, we're very much interested in looking at the human challenges of globalization. So the kind of clients that we're working with are, by definition, very global. They're working in matrix structures, very agile and fluid and responsive structures. They're increasingly using collaborative technologies to coordinate their work around the world. And so therefore we have a particular interest in collaborative and social learning and learning through virtual classrooms as well. So that's a little bit about sort of where I fit within the equation, and really looking forward to today's discussion.
Wonderful, Steve. Thank you so much. And Laurent, tell us a little bit about what you do and your organisation.
Yes, good morning, everybody. And well, I work for a company called Inspirational Development Group, IDG for short. We're a global leadership management performance consultancy. In other words, we look to improve business performance through behavioral change, and typically we look at sort of leadership management and so on. So we've got a partnering agreement with the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, where we take some of the IP from the British Army. That's not to say that we're paramilitary in any way, shape or form, but we do look to understand how people work under pressure and how they're able to keep their minds open at times of conflict, which can obviously be at work, can be in sports, and so on and so forth. So my position is Head of Innovation for IDG, which means that I look after our digital products, one of which is data capture and data manipulation. So we look at sort of take large data sets and look to provide consultancy to our clients with that, and then hopefully sell some consultancy off the back of that at times. And at times we just simply give the data off.
Ah, very interesting. Thank you very much, Laurent. And Helena.
I'm a learning specialist. My background is on innovation in education and in neuroscience. And now I'm working with Fast Future. I research about the future of education, what type of scenarios there are awaiting there for us at every level, actually, from nursery to corporate learning and lifelong learning. So basically, we are looking at how technologies and how trends that are happening right now are changing the way we live, learn, and thrive.
Brilliant, Helena, and that's a really good segue into what it is that we are focusing on today. So let's get some first thoughts from Helena, Laurent, and then Steve about our opening question. So learning is changing. How do we prepare? So what are you seeing, Helena?
So I see two different perspectives on that question. First of all, the way we are learning is changing, definitely. Our minds and our brains are working differently because we're having different strategies to cope with information. So that's one reality. But the other reality is we are remaining the same. We are still being humans in this normal world, and it's not really that we've changed so much in the past 5 years. Having said that, I think it's interesting to see what is expected in society and in work environments for the future. So the pace of changes is happening more and faster and faster, and we have to cope with those changes. And with all the technologies that are changing radically, the way we are training ourselves, the things that are expected from us, from companies, how to maintain employability in the companies, in the organizations we're working at. So I think there are many challenges, but at the same time there's this realistic point of view that we are remaining the same. We haven't changed that much.
Really great points there, Helena, and actually it's part of the Twitter conversation that was going on before today. Roger Shank, who is a well-respected L&D professional in America, was saying to one of our tweets, of course learning hasn't changed. We're still humans, we still learn the same as we always have. And I think our point is, well, what's surrounding that? What's the work that's surrounding that? How's work life changing, like you say? So some interesting points there. Laurent, what's your opening thoughts on this around learning is changing?
Well, what Helena said really, and what you just mentioned there, anthropologically we are humans, we are Homo sapiens, and there is only a certain number of senses that we have that we're able to use in order to learn things. What we've noticed certainly, I mean, our client base tends to be blue chip, tends to be global. What we've noticed, and I don't think I'm saying anything new here, is that people are having to do with work with less. People are working separate from each other, i.e., you may have a manager who's sitting in Hong Kong, and therefore you have to learn how to work as a team with people that you've never met before. Again, it's something that is innately human. I mean, no other animal can do this. No other animal can work with other entities around the world. Or that aren't part of their own physical group. But we're noticing that more and more people are having to do that. Disband a team, bring another team back together again. Disband a team, bring a team back together again. And so those are the kind of trends that we're seeing, and how do we fix that, or rather how do we work with those kind of environments? Well, I don't have the silver bullet for that. Hopefully we can come up with something during the discussion.
Thank you very much, Laurent. And some interesting points there, and people can pick up on that in the chat window, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But Steve, let's come to you for your first thoughts on this, about learning is changing, how do we prepare?
Yeah, I mean, really interesting, and I, again, very much agree with both Laurent and Helena, actually, in terms of what they've said. I think what we are seeing among our clients is this, as people have shorter attention spans and less time, they don't have time to go on formal courses. We know that. There's nothing particularly new about that. So there's been this shift several years ago to focus more on resources. But what I think is also interesting now is that there is a much greater emphasis, for example, on video becoming mainstream, much cleaner, far more crisp pieces of micro-learning. And I think we're probably seeing a time now where learning networks based around particular themes are upending or upstaging the idea of fixed curriculum in that respect. So in other words, learning ecosystems are becoming more agile and therefore more focused around the user, because the most important thing arguably about learning is relevance. How relevant is it to me personally in relation to the job that I've got to do? So I think the other thing that I would say is that we're seeing a much greater emphasis now perhaps and attention paid to the curation of content as opposed to the creation of content. In other words, there's a huge amount of content out there, but if it's not well curated or ordered in such a way that people can access it, it becomes actually more of a burden than a solution. So I think that's an element to this. I think the other thing that I personally have noticed is that we're seeing that in the learning and development function, there's a much greater degree of integration of learning and development into transformational change teams. So, most of our clients are really completely rewiring their whole organizational structure to cope with digitalization. And, that very much builds on Laurent's point about, people are coming together as teams and dispersing as teams. So that often the learning and development function now sits much more integrated, embedded in those teams so that they can be much closer to people's learning needs. So those are the sorts of things that, we're observing. And in terms of how we respond, I mean, I think you have to look at it in three levels. There's the individual response, and the need to take individual responsibility for one's own learning. There's then the sort of the collective response through things like networks and communities, which are becoming more themed and more agile. And I think actually organizations themselves have got some real challenges because there is no one solution that fits all anymore, and therefore I think organizations trying to provide a more nuanced service to a very diverse group of people around the world, that provides a real challenge. And I don't know what the solution is to that. Be really interested to get other people's views on that.
Can I come in on that, because I completely agree, and apologies for agreeing, because there's not much of a discussion with things, but certainly what we noticed is, as you say there, that the real power comes in, as you say, the curation. And I can say that, speak from a data perspective, that is exactly the case. I mean, one can speak about the amount of data that's been collecting on people. I mean, Cambridge Analytica, obviously in the news right now, Facebook in the news, and so on and so forth. They're a case in point, because what they've been able to do is curate the data, pick out the bits that are super important to them, use that data, either monetize it or win an election with it. I think businesses are still some way behind the curve, and I would say that for HR and L&D in particular, simply because many of the companies that we've worked with haven't been given the resources to fully appreciate and do what they can with that data. And that then feeds into, well, if we can curate the data, then we will know we can hyper-personalize, which I think is one of the global trends, learning for the individuals that are going to be pulling that rather than being pushed. So I think if we even take a step back, the curation of the content comes with curation of the data, and it seems to me that isn't happening as quickly perhaps as I had first imagined maybe a year or two ago.
Thank you, Laurent and Steve. So some really great points picked out there. I've been doing a little bit of work recently around digital body language, and data is a huge part of that, and the nuance of the data. And it's something that I know, certainly myself, I'm not as in tune, and I don't use it as much as I should. And be interesting to see in the chat window, does data and the analysis of that, does that scare you? Are you thinking bring it on? Are you thinking I haven't got access to it? So it would be interesting to see what your point is about that in the chat. So let's have a look at the questions that we've got. So first question in from Richard Gadd. Richard, thank you very much. Richard says, Helena mentioned that our minds and brains are working differently. Might this explain the falling interest in the Open University? So the Open University in the UK is a distance learning organisation, been running since the 60s, maybe even before that. So, Helena, I don't know how much you know about the Open University thing at the moment. I certainly don't know a lot other than the headline that I've seen. But tell us what your thoughts are about how minds and brains are working differently, please.
And maybe I can answer that question with the one of Dave Davis, that it's also related to about the amount of evidence we have on our attention span reduction. So there is research and there is evidence that our executive function is reducing just because we are training ourselves less than we used to do before. Specifically, we are less patient. We don't have to hold our thoughts and our memory for so long as we used to do before. So it's not that there's cognitive and physical difference between the people that is being born now and the people that were born in the past century. It's just that we are training ourselves in different ways. So relating that to the falling of Open University and connecting with the ideas of our colleagues, we are more and more exquisite about the content we want to get. So the level and the curation of the content that we expect when we are being trained and when we are being exposed to learning something new needs to be much more engaging than before. So knowledge has become a commodity that is accessible everywhere. So you don't want to find knowledge anymore. You want to find specific, personalized bits of knowledge with the bits and pieces that you specifically are interested in. And this is interesting because this aligns in a way with the focus of organizations that say that we don't need specific and technical knowledge. That's not enough now. We need it, but it's not enough. We need specific skills, divergent thinking, creative solutions towards complex problems. So in that sense, in my perspective, there needs to be curated, personalized, interesting knowledge available out there in programs such online universities, online corporate training, whatever. But at the same time, there needs to be a focus on experience. And those are the learners of today. We are expecting to have interesting experience that engage our emotions and in some way make learning meaningful, you know? So, yeah, I don't know if I answered both questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Richard, you can always let us know your thoughts in the chat window about that. I really like how you've brought that together, Helena. That really made a lot of sense for me. We're going to move on to a question from Dave Davis. So thank you for this question, Dave. Dave, we're going to go to, with your question, we're going to go to Steve first, then we'll go back to Helena and Laurent on this one. So in the chat window, Connor had said, I think our attention span is becoming shorter and shortened due to technology. Learners' patience is becoming less and learning needs to be quick, interactive and entertaining. And in the question panel, David said, is there any evidence that attention spans are shorter now than in the past? So Steve first, then Helena, what's your thoughts on that one, Steve?
I can only speak from personal experience, but anecdotally I would say that I think one of the questions subconsciously in the mind of a learner now is what is the cost of being distracted from the job that I'm doing? And therefore there is much less patience to allow a learning idea to flow and evolve and develop if it's not immediately seen as relevant to the job in hand. So I think one of the reasons potentially why there may be shorter learning or maybe shorter attention spans is primarily because of this idea about the cost of distraction. Because I'm under pressure, I've got to get a job done. And, you know, have I got half a day or a quarter of the day or even 15 minutes to look at a TED talk when there are multiple sort of messages coming through on my screen and so on and so forth. So I think that's one factor. It's an environmental factor. I think also that, you know, that I can only say this from my own evidence of somebody who's been involved with design and delivery of virtual classrooms at scale across the world, where, you know, we're working with maybe a global audience, several hundred people. And one of the things that I know from what I've seen is that when you put in multiple mechanisms of contribution, multiple ways in which individuals can engage with what is going on, there is a much better degree of engagement and response. So if you like, busy screens that stimulate different types of learning in different minds create a much greater degree of richer engagement. So that's you know, where I would, you know, come in on this. And I do think to a certain extent technology has shortened, you know, through the type of formatting that we've got, attention spans. One of the concerns I do have, however, is that at the same time we also see this trend increasingly for mindfulness to you know, enter people's lives. In other words, we want to still the mind, we want to relax the you know, the muscle of the brain and create a degree of stillness so that we can take stock and get to know ourselves again. So I think that there may be some sort of contradictory forces, if you like, at play in all of this. I don't make any particular you know, judgment on that, but it's just an observation that, you know, that I would observe in that sense. I by the way, personally, I practice mindfulness, and I find mindfulness an extremely useful tool for creating an element of personal poise, for example, and in a stressful environment that can be a very worthwhile thing.
Thank you, Steve. And I think you make a great point about what is it that's actually kind of driving the busyness, if you like, and maybe the mindfulness and other similar techniques are what we need to just kind of balance that out. Elena, what's your point of view on this about the question about is there any evidence that attention spans are shorter now than in the past?
So to go into the term of executive functions that include the term of attention, so attention itself, I don't think it has reduced. However, our ability to sustain attention relies on other cognitive abilities. And these other cognitive abilities are memory, are planning, are inhibition, are even location. So these many other cognitive abilities that in a way depend and relate to attention are those, and it's the combination of all, which the life we have today are not necessarily training these abilities in the way that they used to before. I'm going to use specific examples. Regarding to memory. Memory, it's correlated to attention. So your ability to remember an activity you have to do and remember the importance of an ability and inhibit that memory to then use the attention you have now to focus on a specific information, it's important. Now, we not necessarily have the same ability to memorize things, not because of that cognitive, I don't know, trait. It's just because we have our phones and reminders, and we've planned our week, and we don't need to use that. We have ways or city mappers to localize ourselves, so we don't need to memorize locations of places, for example. So all of these have to do with, for example, working memory capacity, that again, it's a cognitive ability that is necessary for paying attention properly. right? To retain our attention in a specific activity. So if we isolate the fact that we cannot pay attention enough, I think it would be wrong to say that now our attention span has lowered. Yeah, it's a little bit reductive. However, if we see the other cognitive functions that are related to that, just because of a matter of practice, our ability to sustain our attention may be interrupted by our style of life, a way of life, you know.
Okay, so there's lots of really good stuff in there to pick apart and some lovely conversations going on in the chat window as well. So if you're a little bit quieter, you are more than welcome to contribute a thought or a question or a comment there. We'd love you to get involved, but you don't have to. You can do what we're talking about. Sit back, relax, listen, watch, and take things from there. Laurent, do you have any points of view?
Well, look, again, I agree with my colleagues here. I think again the brain hasn't necessarily changed over the course of the last few thousand years, so it is as a consequence of our environment. I mean, I think everybody on this webinar can confirm perhaps that you have your mobile phone on your desk, you're working away, it bleeps, it may be a WhatsApp message. You have a look, right? There's the dopamine hit at the back of your head, which makes you want to pick that telephone up. It's very much like the slot machine. Anyone that's been to Las Vegas, you walk past your hotel lobby trying to get out, and there are blings and blings and blings everywhere that sort of grab your attention, and maybe I can get that feeling, that dopamine hit if I play a slot machine. So there's an environmental aspect to this which I think is unprecedented. I mean, you just have to look at. I was thinking about this the other day. Flight. We've never been in a situation in human history in which we can go from one place to another, the other side of the world, in 12 hours. How does the body adapt to that? Well, our circadian rhythm is completely changed. The body has never had to deal with this kind of exposure. So I think, again, going back to your anthropology and the human brain, we haven't evolved any different, but we do have to find ways, mechanisms to deal with not picking up the WhatsApp message when it's there. Putting it away. Put your phone in your drawer just for a little bit, so that you don't get distracted. I mean, it's a really prosaic thing to say, but I think if you can live your life in that way, live the experience as opposed to the interminable dopamine hits, then perhaps your attention span will lengthen somewhat.
Absolutely, and Emma says, I think we need to prioritise more. Switch off mobile devices, turn email alerts off when completing a specific job. Emma, you could be right. I interrupt myself more than anybody else interrupts me. That Alt-Tab just to check what's going on Twitter or in my email, it's so addictive. I'll find in a moment, I'll find an article I read the other day about somebody who has a whole day a week where he literally switches off the Wi-Fi, turns off the phone, and just focuses on productivity. I'll find out and share that with you. And Laura's saying, yeah, I need a digital detox, so yeah, I'm sure we can understand that. So on this point of attention span, Connor's asked a really good question, and I'll come to you first on this one, Steve. He says, so the attention span. How do we keep users' attention span? What are the best methods? Video, animation?
Well, I think a lot depends on what you're trying to convey through the learning. And I personally strongly believe that the issue of relevance is the most important question that anybody who is involved in learning and relating to your audience has to ask. Because if you have relevance, ultimately, that will govern the degree of attention that you will earn from those people that you are engaging. I think the other thing also, just even as we look at this particular webinar, this format, which I, by the way, happen to love, is the fact that although we are looking at one topic, there are multiple contributors. So you could argue that people are being permanently distracted, but actually all that is happening is that the contributions that are coming in are all absolutely relevant. They're on topic, and therefore, in effect, they're probably more engaging than if it is just one person giving their particular views pushed out to a learner in that respect. So, you know, where are we going with this? I think a lot depends on what you're trying to convey. You know, technical learning, for example, is going to be different from soft skills learning. You know, more profound personal reflection, you know, absolutely requires people to, you know, pull away from the distractions that prevent, if you like, yourself from engaging with yourself. So for me, the core issue, or the core question is, what am I trying to convey? How relevant it is to my audience? And then what are the best mechanisms to actually achieve that?
Again, some really good stuff in there, Steve. Thank you. And Connor, hopefully that's useful for you. Let's have a chat with Laura. Laura,
I'm not sure if it's much of an insight, but, and I'm afraid, Connor, that I won't be able to
what's your insight?
Answer specifically for you, seeing as you specialize in e-learning. But here at IDG, we specialize in face-to-face interventions, actually. We have, you know, our digital side is more on the blended learning, so it's to support the face-to-face interactions that one has. So we will typically have, let's imagine our flagship program will be sort of multi-modular, so 5 modules, 3 days each module, depending on the client. One, the beginning may be at Sandhurst, one may be in Hong Kong, the other one may be in the US, depending on what, again, where the different clients are. And we find that it just helps us to have absolute attention to, you know, okay, well, you're not bringing your phones. We're all in a classroom together. We're going to do some experiential stuff. We're going to try and deconstruct you. We're going to try and force you to think. And we're going to put you in an environment which is outside of your typical environment. It's not in the office. You're doing something which is totally different, in an army base sometimes. And we find that gets their attention. We find that seems to be, to some people, a life-changing event. You know, it's not much of an insight for Connor, I'm afraid, but perhaps for other people it is. Look, the old style has still some merit. It is more difficult to do nowadays because of the challenges of again, flying people around and taking days off work and the cost, of course. But we still believe that the return is greater. So a little pitch for IDG there, I'm afraid, but I mean, that's what we believe in. So there you go.
And that's why we've asked you here for your passion and your experience. And I think you make a great point about there are costs and challenges associated with that kind of work. But when you know that the payoff from it is going to be really big, it's worth that investment. And then when we look at something like the blended opportunities, online courses, virtual courses, which everybody knows I'm very much in favour of, but it has to be the right tool for the job. So for the kind of thing that Laurent is doing, probably, you know, me running a virtual course is not going to be the way to do that. It's going to be a different thing. And Helena, what's your point of view about this on?
I think the first important thing is to listen through online or through face-to-face interaction what their learning objectives are. So in this matter of relevance, if you're as a trainer, if your objectives meet with those of the learner, then we will have like a fresh, good start. That's very important for me. That they are very conscious and clear about what their process will be and what it is expected of their performance and of their learning. No? The key points of the results of this training, I think it's very, very important. In online or in face to face, I think that's crucial. The other thing is to think how they can use and transform and construct with the information that they are receiving to connect it with their real life and their thoughts and their own experience. So if we have a course that only gives us input and does not give us enough time or feedback or experience or homework or whatever that allows us to process all that knowledge, the whole educational experience relies on our ability to memorize. But in the other hand, if you have a course or a training where you get information, but you work with that information, you construct your own meaning about it, then you will necessarily be engaged. Yeah. So I think that sort of construction of meaning and making sense of what they are teaching to you, it's crucial.
Absolutely, and I think somebody said that right at the beginning of the webinar in the chat, that it must be interactive, and interactive in a really good quality way, so that we're taking away that meaning and not just remembering rote facts, because that can be kind of challenging. So let's go to another question that we've had. So Sarah Stocks, thank you very much for your question in the Q&A pod. We'll come to Steve on this one first. Steve, Sarah asks, how do we get people to take responsibility for their learning? Oh, Sarah, what a great question. I wish I had the answer on this. I think I'll be a millionaire. Steve, let's work out the answer
Not
together.
Exactly a small question.
Together. How can we get people to take responsibility?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, we're all interested in ourselves. Let's be clear about this. We live in the age of the quantified self, as somebody once rather nicely put. We've all got Fitbits, and we like data and information about ourselves, and we like doing our profiles and so on and so forth. So maybe part of the answer is in asking the question, am I interested in myself? Because if I'm interested in myself, then I'm interested in what I need to learn and how I need to develop. Now, if we look at the work environment, the day of having a career from cradle to grave, completely gone. So we're in a world that consists of a set of projects. Now, those may be projects within one company. They may be projects that go from place to place to place to place in different companies. And if we think about it in terms of the skill sets that are required for participating in that journey, ultimately you're going to increasingly have to work across disciplines and in different contexts each time. So my personal view is that if you're committed to your career, you should be committed to taking responsibility for your own learning. And what's interesting is that probably today more than ever now, facilitated through things like technology and technology platforms, with gamification, we've got all sorts of ways in which we can see what progress we're making, what others might think about a particular topic, who perhaps is attracting, the greatest number of followers in response to a question or an observation that is made. So in other words, learning has been liberated, let's say, from an event into a wider sphere. And the responsibility, as far as I'm concerned, is that, is for me to look at what I need to learn and to find the communities and the networks that are going to be able to offer the enrichment of the things that I perhaps lack. And the other thing I feel has now become, far more evident is that learning networks and communities are really developing in terms of that, because they transcend companies often. They go through companies, they go across functions, they go across countries even. So in effect, we can draw our ideas from a wider range of places and people. And key to all of this, therefore, is curiosity. If you like what people are presenting, in effect, you're going to maintain an element of engagement as a result of your own curiosity. There is another issue, of course, relating to all of this, because learning is not just knowledge. It is about how you adapt your behavior to become more effective. And that is where, if you like, the way in which we work under circumstances is in the face-to-face environment. That's actually where so much of the action takes place as well. So there's more to it than just simply knowledge. That's my starter for 10.
Thank you, Steve. Really great, interesting point. And curiosity, I've been curious about curiosity recently. And you're absolutely right. I think it's curiosity and self-awareness for me are two key underlying features of being a great person in our working world as it is at the moment. I haven't done too much thinking about it, but that's some stuff I've been looking at.
Yes, and I want to start
Helena, let's come to you.
the curiosity topic because it's very tricky and it's almost an art. Because curiosity is related also to that challenging and the unknown. So if something is challenging enough, it will arouse the curiosity on ourselves. So, but if it's too challenging, too difficult, then it will create rejection. So if you want to take charge of your own responsibility, you need to know that if you're facing a topic or a course or a training that it's too challenging for you, or if you are in the other position, too much challenge creates rejection. Too much unknown creates resistance. So we have to keep on the art of staying in the middle, just providing the right amount of curiosity, but also the right amount of known information that makes people feel comfortable and happy because they know that they have something to offer, so they can take charge of their own learning process and they can keep going because it's a sort of scaffolding. If the scaffold is too high, I'm not going to reach for it, but if it's just on the right level, I am going to keep on going forward. And I need to know, I think this is very important, I need to know what the process is and what I am expected to do. What I've seen is that when people is not engaged in their own learning process, usually they have no idea in the end what are their gains. So what's the impact this training will have on their careers? Maybe they know by theory, but they don't have clear examples of people that have been through this and have succeeded through this path, maybe. They do not have a clear planning ability to plan hypothetically how this training, for example, can impact specifically on their life. So I think that's also important. Sometimes we are so caught up on our daily lives that we don't even realize that we're not paying attention about the services that surround us. And we have the training, the information just out there, but it takes someone or the introduction of a training or the organization to let you know, stop and think. This is the perspective and your profile, your professional profile can be potentialized by these trainings and by this knowledge.
Absolutely, and that's where the learning team should be working, either with the subject matter specialists and getting to know the audience as well, so that scaffolding is at that right level, like you say. So thank you very much for that, Helena. Let's have a really quick answer from Laurent on that one.
Question.
And then we're going
I'm not
to
going to be able to give you a quick answer, I'm afraid. But it is, how do you get people to take responsibility for their learning? Is for me the question that I think about every single day. Because it begets the question of education and getting children to be curious, how to teach kids how to learn, how to teach kids how to enjoy learning, which they can then take on into their active life, into their work life. So I think the key to the word really is taking responsibility to a certain degree. I mean, if you can foster a culture in an organization that allows people to learn and allows people to pull as opposed to push, learning, maybe give people like Google do, a certain amount of time a week to do their own thing. Then I think that allows people to then say, okay, well, I'm now going to take responsibility for, learning new things, because learning is actually pretty interesting. So that's my short answer. It's probably totally irrelevant, but I mean, those are the things that are flying into my head at the moment. I could talk about this all day, so I'm sorry if it's not exactly what you wanted to hear, but taking responsibility for your own actions, I think, is ultimately what I was trying to say there.
Brilliant, Laurent. Thank you so much. So we've got one last question. So Richard, sorry we're not going to have time for your question, but Emma, we're going to have a really quick 30-second stab at your question. Emma asks, what sort of follow-up activities do people use post-training to ensure the learning outcomes and that we enable behaviour changes?
Well,
so if you've got some ideas, feel free to put those into the chat window.
So if
and
you're, for
Helena,
example,
some really quick ideas from you that can help Emma out.
Soft skill, having in an organization a culture of feedback and letting know your colleagues what are your goals and what are you working at. It's very important because then you know that they are expecting your behavior, and they can let you know as well when you succeeded and when you were able to put those skills, for example, into practice. So I think that is very important. Yeah.
Well, in the words of the great Nike advertising gurus, just do it.
Thank you very much, Helena.
Is what I say.
And Laurent, some really quick
there is social proof, of course, and there are tactics that you can use to ensure that maybe there's follow-up, that people are actually guiding you, or they're helping you, or whatever it is. But ultimately, the responsibility falls on your shoulders to just do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just do it. Don't be frightened to fail. And I also think that having coaching and mentoring resources available is really important, because learning is not an event. It's a continuation. It's a continuum.
Brilliant, thank you. So Emma, I hope that was helpful. Definitely find different resources, curation, ask people what they would find useful, get some feedback on what it is that you've done, maybe some data if you've got a big enough kind of audience to try and get some insight into what that might be going forward. And come back to TJ and share that with us later about what you've learned. So we'd love to hear that from people. Okay, so we're going to go into our reflection now. Our speakers are staying here. Don't worry, they're not going anywhere, but we are coming off webcam. So let's just wave a little goodbye and we'll go into our reflection now. So guys, have a think about what it is that you are doing and what you're going to be doing after this. Let's practice our text tool. So go and grab the T text tool on your screen. It's on the left of your screen, just like the screen grab. And then if you go and click on the screen, you should be able to type your name and then click again and share it with everybody else. So let's go and have a practice of that first of all. So please go and use the text tool. Click on the screen to write your name, and then click again and it will reveal it to everybody. This is looking good. And if you want to move it, what you can do is go and use the very first tool. Is you can click on that first tool, pick up your name and move it around the screen if you want to. Or move my pink boxes if you prefer to do that, that's fine too. Brilliant, we've got our names on screen, and if at any point this isn't working, then you are more than welcome to just pop something in the chat window instead. So then let's have a look. What is your action point from today? We've had a great discussion, but what is it? So use that T-text tool. Go and share your thoughts on what you're going to do after today. Don't worry if you've typed over someone else. What you can always do is just move these things around. We can just use that very first tool in the toolbox to pick things up and move them around. So let's see what some of the things are that you've got here. We've got reflect, absolutely. Something that I know I don't do often enough, but Steve's reminded me about mindfulness. So whether that's kind of laying down and relaxing, or whether it's maybe going out for a walk and a think, that's currently what I'm trying to do, to do some reflection. So that's a good point. Try to promote autonomy and for people to take responsibility to continue learning and make behavioural changes. That's a really good one. So definitely come back to us. Let us know how it is that you are getting on. If you ever want to write for Training Journal, a little article, a blog post, something like that, you're more than welcome to. And John Kennard, who's our editor, I've just pasted his details into the chat window if you ever want to share something, because all of these things that you're doing and the things that you're trying, that's what everybody else is learning too. What else have we got on our whiteboard? Review how we can support making space for individuals to reflect on their learning without distractions. Helena, what's your thoughts there about helping people to reflect on learning without distractions?
I think that it's a matter of how much do you care about your own learning and your ability to be self-conscious and self-reflecting. So yeah, I think it's a very personal exercise, but at the same time it could be integrated into training programs, maybe as evaluation, as a peer feedback, self-assessments.
Brilliant. So thank you very much. So having kind of getting all sorts of people involved could be important there. So back on the whiteboard, think about learning as a daily habit and fit in bite-sized learning when I know I have time to focus. Really great point. And it's something that we don't always think about, even as learning professionals ourselves. Keep being passionate about opportunities for helping people to learn. Steve, that must speak to your heart there as well, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, passion and learning to me are they go hand in hand. They're the same thing. And it goes back to this comment about, being interested in ourselves and our own development will naturally create, hopefully, the passion to discover and explore and be curious.
Thank you very much. So other things we've got on the screen here, mix it up more, use more different techniques, which is a great idea. Take risks, absolutely. Really focus interventions on learner responsibility to make changes. That's a great one. Reflect to see if we're offering the right level, the relevant learning areas to people. That's something that so often we get down in this little rabbit hole and suddenly we go, well, how did we end up here and not doing the right things? Promote blended learning and follow-up activities. Excellent. I suppose I've had it confirmed that our attention spans and learning needs are changing. I will attempt to be more flexible in my thinking. Lovely. And last one I missed there, I think, was become more innovative with ideas in delivering content. And Laurent, that innovative idea must speak to you. And what's your thoughts at the end of today, Laurent?
Oh, wow, you've given me the Jerry Springer final thought here. We are bombarded by information. If you want to, you can listen to a podcast on your way home. That'll give you some bite-sized information. If you want, you can go online as soon as you get home and learn some stuff. But you know what? Sometimes I don't think we do this enough, and I certainly don't. Sometimes it's just good to put on a pair of earphones, listen to an album. Something I used to do when I was a kid and I don't do anymore, and just think things through. Just have some time to yourself. That's something that I need to do more of, that I've started doing more of, and I would suggest most people should do too, because we don't do enough of it.
Brilliant, thank you, Laurent. And Helena, what's your final thoughts, Jerry Springer style, as Laurent said, about the discussion that we've had today?
Engage, and emotion is everything for learning.
Wonderful, I love that about emotion. You're so right. and about kind of grabbing people's emotion and attention at the beginning and developing it throughout our sessions or in our materials. Thank you very much, Elena. And Steve, what are your final thoughts?
It's such a vast area, isn't it? And it's not just about knowledge, it's about imagination. It's the, for me, it's the Einstein quote that imagination is more important than knowledge. We've got plenty of tools that can hold, facilitate and dispense knowledge. It's what we do with that that makes the journey challenging and interesting. So, you know, pay attention to your creativity and imagination and your social intelligence, your ability to get on well with others and be empathetic.
I love that. Thank you, Helena, Laurent, and Steve, for all of your thoughts and the things that you've shared with us today. And you've done an absolutely fabulous job, kept us all engaged, well, certainly kept me engaged throughout the whole of the session, and some really good things that you said and shared and we've discussed. And I'm just sharing the details for our speakers again there. So please do keep in contact with them all. And I'm sure they would absolutely welcome your connections and chats and conversations going on after this. So you know that you can go and look at our webinars at any time. Our previous webinars, all of this kind of format, you'll be able to go and have a look at. What are our, you can continue the conversation on Twitter. So we've gone and shared a whole load of thoughts on Twitter under trainingjournal.com. So if you're not following it already, please do. And share your thoughts and what you've learned and what you're taking away. And later, what are your reflections? And what's coming up for our webinars? Well, we've got artificial intelligence coming up next month. We've got all about empathy coming up in June. And how can we actually relate that to business? What's going on there? Also, we've got then in July, how to ensure that you get learning transfer from your learning. If you haven't come across that, it's becoming a much more a term and a system and a process that people are talking about much more. So it's definitely something to go and have a look at. And it's really important to know that the things we're doing actually really do work for people in the end. And also I'm going to say a huge thank you to all of you guys. You've been absolutely brilliant. Your conversations, your questions in the chat window, in the question window, you are what makes this conversation. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you on our next session coming soon.